Hey there and welcome. Tonight we're going to explore some of the most terrifying cults that existed during medieval times. Real groups that operated in the shadows, influenced kingdoms, and left behind stories that still feel unsettling today. So if you enjoy this kind of content, feel free to subscribe and let me know in the comments, where are you listening from and what time is it right now where you are. Now let's begin. Let's go back, way back. The year is somewhere around 500 AD. You're in Persia, not the modern kind, of course. This is the old world, the Sasanian Empire. The land is dry and cracked in some places, green and terraced in others. You see fire temples dotting the cities and caravans inching across the desert, full of silken dates and stories. In this world, fire is sacred. The kings are powerful, the poor are many, and change is coming. You're about to meet a man named Mazdak, and whether you've heard of him before or not, by the time this story ends, you'll understand why the powerful wanted him erased. Let me tell you about Mazdak. He wasn't a king, or a general, or anyone born into legend. He was by most accounts just a man, a thinker, a preacher, but he saw something everyone else ignored. Mazdak looked at Persia and saw rot at the edges. The nobles were hoarding, the priests were growing wealthy off rituals that no longer meant anything, and the poor, they were forgotten. So Mazdak did what no one else dared. He started talking, and people started listening. He taught that all suffering came from two things, greed and selfishness. He said that if you could take those away, if you could strip down the walls that separated rich from poor, high from low, the world would begin to heal. He taught that people should share everything, wealth, food, even their homes. And in one particularly controversial idea, he argued that women too should no longer be hoarded by the elite. Now, whether that was meant literally or symbolically is still debated, but it didn't matter. The idea was powerful, and it was dangerous, but to the poor, it felt like the first breath of justice in centuries. You can almost imagine it now, a quiet home lit by oil lamps, somewhere on the edge of Kintisophan. A dozen people gathered. They've brought what little food they have, and laid it out on a mat. Bread, nuts, dried fruit. Someone starts to read from a scroll. Maybe they're reciting Mazdak's words from memory. Everyone listens, and for just a moment, they feel equal, whole seen. This is where it becomes more than a movement. This is where it becomes a cult. Not in the modern sinister sense, but in the way that people follow an idea with everything they have. A way of life. A total commitment. They called themselves Mazdakites, and they lived by rules that must have seemed radical to everyone else. They wore simple clothes, ate no meat, drank no wine. They believed violence was never justified, unless you were protecting the innocent. They shared their belongings. They refused to flatter kings or priests. They believed the divine was found in goodness, not temples. And slowly, they started changing the empire from underneath. A king joins in now. Here's where things take a strange turn. You'd think the king, Kavada, would be the first to shut it all down, right? But no, he joined them. Kavad was having problems of his own. The nobility was too strong, the priesthood too smug. So when he saw Mazdak's movement, he saw not a threat, but a weapon. If the Mazdakites could weaken the nobles, then Kavad could regain control. So he gave them his support. For a short, surreal moment in history, the ruler of Persia stood beside a cult leader. Mazdak's teachings became law. Land was redistributed. Wealth was seized. The priesthood was furious. And the people, they rejoiced. It probably felt like a dream to Mazdak's followers. For once they weren't hiding. They were changing things, really changing things. But you can probably guess what happened next. It doesn't last. The backlash came hard. The clergy, especially the high Zoroastrian priests, couldn't stand it. Neither could the nobles. Imagine, if you will, the most powerful families in an empire being told to share their daughters and their estates with former servants. They began plotting. Eventually Kavad either lost control or lost his nerve. Some say he was pressured, others say he was overthrown, then restored. Whatever the truth, he turned on Mazdak, and just like that the light was snuffed out. Mazdak and hundreds of his followers were summoned to what they thought was a peaceful meeting. Instead they were executed, and not quietly. One chronicler claims Mazdak was buried alive, head first, feet up. Whether or not that's true, it gives you a sense of how badly they wanted to humiliate him. His followers were wiped out in brutal purges, their writings destroyed, their houses burned. The empire went back to the way it had always been, or tried to, but the ideas stayed. And here's the thing I want you to remember, even as you drift off. Even though they killed Mazdak, his ideas never really died. They survived in whispers, in folk tales, in hidden gatherings. His name showed up again centuries later, among rebel groups and heretical sects. The dream of equality, of a society based not on birth or power but shared goodness, refused to vanish. And somewhere out there, maybe in a small village, or among travelers resting by a fire, people still spoke of him. Maybe not his full name, maybe not every teaching, but the spark was still there. Mazdakism was more than a cult. It was a quiet rebellion that asked a terrifying question. What if we didn't need kings at all? You've left the great cities of Persia behind. No more fire temples or royal courts. This time you're climbing into the mountains, into the rocky borderlands between the Byzantine Empire and Armenia. The roads are rough, the villages sparse, it's cold at night, and the stars shine a little too brightly for comfort. You find yourself in a world that feels forgotten, but it isn't empty. It's hiding something, a belief system, a way of life. A cult, though its followers would never use that word. They call themselves Paulicians, and in the deep silence of these hills, they're rewriting what it means to be Christian. This won't look like the Christianity you know. There are no cathedrals, no icons, no saints, only the New Testament, only the Spirit. You're about to walk into a movement that rejected the entire material world and quietly built something of its own, right under the empire's nose. You meet the Paulicians. It starts with a man named Constantine of Manalis, somewhere in the early 600s. He's an Armenian by birth, but what matters more is his mind. He's curious, hungry for truth. One day he's given a book, or possibly two books. We're not sure, but what we do know is that he reads the New Testament, all of it, deeply, over and over again, and what he finds changes him. He doesn't see any of the ornate traditions that dominate the Byzantine Church. He doesn't find icons or saints or candlelit rituals. What he finds is a message of spirit over matter, of simplicity, of direct communion with God. He reads the words of Paul, the apostle, and takes them to heart in a way few others have. He adopts the name Silvanus, after one of Paul's companions, and soon he begins to teach. You imagine him in a stone-walled home, lit by a single oil lamp. His students, poor farmers, villagers, and wanderers, sit on the dirt floor, listening. He doesn't read in Latin or Greek, but in the local tongue, and his message is clear. The world is evil, the body is a prison, only the soul matters. You watch as this idea takes root, not in rebellion, not in war, but in quiet certainty. These people aren't interested in reforming the church. They believe it's already lost. They think the physical world is the work of a lesser corrupt God. They say the Catholic sacraments, the rituals, the robes, all of it, are meaningless distractions. And more importantly, they live that belief, how they operate. So now you ask, how does a group like this survive? And that's where it gets interesting. The Paulicians don't build churches. They meet in homes, in caves, in barns. They appoint leaders called teachers, but these aren't priests in the formal sense. They don't dress differently. They don't claim power. They're simply the ones who understand the faith most deeply. Everything is stripped down. No icons, no crosses, no relics. The Paulicians believe all of those things are idolatry. Instead, they focus on the word, on scripture, on teaching, on personal transformation. They refuse to baptize infants. Why? Because infants can't choose faith. To them, baptism should only happen when someone is old enough to understand what they're doing. They reject marriage as a divine sacrament, seeing it as part of the material world. Some members even choose celibacy, not out of guilt or shame, but as a way of loosening the soul's ties to the flesh. And they do something else that really shakes the foundations of the empire. They don't believe in obedience to corrupt rulers. That alone is enough to get you labeled a heretic. But the Paulicians go further. In some regions they refuse to pay taxes. They won't serve in imperial armies. They quietly encourage local communities to take care of each other without looking to Constantinople. In a time when church and empire are fused together, when to question one is to betray the other. This is radical. This isn't just a cult of belief. It's a network of resistance. Persecution begins. It doesn't take long for the empire to notice. By the 8th century, Paulician communities are growing across eastern Anatolia. Whole villages adopt their beliefs. Families pass down the teachings in secret. The movement is spreading, and so the empire responds. At first it's warnings, then it's fines, then exile, but it escalates. There's one story, and I want you to picture this quietly, of a Paulician teacher who is arrested and ordered to recant. He refuses, so he's forced to watch as his own followers are executed in front of him, one by one. Still he doesn't renounce his faith. In the end they kill him too. You can feel the weight of that kind of commitment. Imagine believing in something so deeply that you'd face death, calmly, rather than deny it. But the persecution only strengthens them. They fight back now. Here's the twist. Around the 9th century, the Paulicians decide they've had enough of being hunted. They begin to arm themselves. Under a leader named Carbis, they flee deeper into the borderlands and establish a semi-independent state in the region of Tefrike. They build fortresses. They train militias. They form alliances, sometimes even with Muslim powers, and begin launching raids against Byzantine territories. To the empire, they are now more than heretics. They are enemies. What started as a spiritual cult has now become a militant theocracy, with its own laws, lands, and a vision of purity that cannot coexist with the imperial church. For decades they hold out. Empire after empire tries to crush them. One general even offers amnesty, promising peace if they convert. Some accept, others refuse and vanish into the mountains, and like before, the crackdown is brutal. Entire Paulician villages are massacred, survivors are enslaved or deported. A few are shipped west to distant provinces, hoping they'll fade away, but instead, they adapt, they spread. The legacy moves west. Here's the part that most people forget. The Paulicians didn't just disappear. Their ideas quietly seep into Europe. They influence other groups, the Bogomils in Bulgaria, the Cathars in France, even the Waldensians centuries later. Whenever a new sect rises claiming the church is corrupt, that faith should be simple, that the spirit matters more than flesh, you can often trace that back to a Paulician seed. They survive, not as armies, but as ideas. And in that way, they never really died. As you lie here now, maybe you've closed your eyes by now, maybe not. But I want you to think about what it means to live your whole life believing that the world you see, the walls, the roads, even your own body, isn't real in the way you thought. To believe that the true world is unseen, and that every moment is a chance to shed what binds you to this place. That's what the Paulicians believed. And whether you agree or not, there's something quietly haunting about it. A hidden world, beneath the world you know. And with that thought, we move on. We move on. We've left the high valleys and stone homes of the Paulicians behind. Their quiet rebellion fades into the distance, leaving only the echo of their footsteps in your ears. But the world doesn't stop changing, and not far from where we were, something louder begins to stir. This time, it doesn't start in the shadows. It begins with fire, with red cloaks, with marching boots in the dust and chants that shake the ground. You're now in the mountains of northern Persia, what would be Azerbaijan today. The land is rough and green and cold. These people here, they haven't given up hope like others have. No, they're preparing for something. Not salvation, not escape. Revenge. They call themselves the Kuramites, and unlike the Paulicians or the Mazdakites before them, the Kuramites have no intention of staying quiet. You might hear the name and not know what to make of it. Kuramite means something like the joyful ones. But don't let the name fool you. They're not joyful in any way you'd recognize. Their joy is the kind that comes from burning down the system that failed them, from seeing their enemies run, from watching towers fall. They're not just believers, they're warriors, mystics with swords, and their leader, you're going to remember his name, Babak Kuramind. You picture him now, standing on the edge of a mounting cliff, the wind pulling his long red cloak behind him, face stern, jaw tight. His followers below chant his name, like he's more than a man, and maybe to them he is. He didn't start the Kuramites, not exactly. Their roots stretch back to the Mazdakite movement. Long before Babak was born, they held on to old ideas about equality, about sharing wealth, about rejecting religious authority. But unlike the Mazdakites, they didn't seek favor from kings. They wanted to take everything back by force. Their beliefs are hard to pin down. Some accounts say they followed a strange blend of Zoroastrianism and Shia Islam. Others say they created their own scriptures. Some even whispered that they believed in reincarnation. But to outsiders, especially their enemies, all of this was irrelevant. What mattered was that they refused to submit. The Kuramites organized in small cells, secret meetings, codes, rituals. Some say they anointed themselves in oil before battle, while others claim they chanted verses from a lost book. The red clothing was deliberate, the color of rebellion, of defiance, of divine blood. Their spiritual leaders weren't just preachers, they were commanders, strategists, revolutionaries cloaked in prophecy. Babak rises through their ranks, not because he demands power, but because he earns loyalty. He's decisive, charismatic, and unlike many who came before him, he isn't afraid to fight a war he knows he might lose. And he doesn't lose, at least not at first. For over 20 years Babak and his Kuramites hold out against the Abbasid Caliphate, the most powerful empire in the region. They use the mountains as cover, their fortresses are hidden in fog. They strike in the night, disappear into the wilderness, and blend with the villagers who protect them. They never stay in one place too long, and yet their movement grows. People who've lost everything, farmers, former soldiers, outcasts, join them in droves. The Kuramites become more than a cult, they become a resistance. Their rituals aren't just spiritual, they're military. Every gathering is a planning session. Every prayer doubles as code. Every symbol is layered. A red scarf, a scratched mark on a stone, a whisper passed between riders. It feels like a dream when you imagine it now. This hidden army in the hills, guided by a strange burning faith that no outsider quite understands. But of course the dream doesn't last. The Abbasid Caliphate doesn't ignore them forever. When it finally moves to crush them, it does so with brutal force. The army is huge, the supply lines endless. General after general is sent to wipe Babak off the map. But he doesn't make it easy. For years he evades capture. His people vanish into secret paths. One fortress falls, another rises. His fighters know the land too well. And every time the Caliphate thinks it's finished the job, the Kuramites come roaring back. Babak becomes a legend in his own lifetime. A ghost to some, a demon to others. But even legends can't run forever. Eventually he's betrayed. A rival pretends to offer shelter, then turns him in. They don't kill him right away. They parade him through the capital, chained, bleeding, exhausted. A symbol of what happens to those who dare challenge the empire. He's tortured, humiliated. Some say they severed his limbs in front of an audience, just to make the point clear. And yet, in the final moments, witnesses say he didn't cry out. He didn't beg. He looked his executioners in the eye and died the same way he lived, defiant. His cult, his movement, doesn't survive the purge. The mountain fortresses are razed, his remaining generals hunted down, the red banners burned, the fires extinguished. But what doesn't burn are the stories. Stories whispered by travelers around campfires. Stories told in secret homes long after the soldiers had passed through. Stories of a man in a red cloak who fought for the poor, for justice, for a world where no empire would ever again own the land or the soul. And even if you've never heard his name before tonight, now you have. Babak Kuramiden, the warrior prophet, the man who made an empire bleed. And with that we leave the mountains behind. You're still safe, still resting, but we're not done yet. Because to the west across the mountains and forests another group is forming. They're quieter than the Kuramites, more ascetic, but just as radical. They believe the world you see is an illusion, that God is light, and that all flesh, yours included, is the work of the devil. They'll live humbly, preach simply, but their ideas will ripple through Europe for centuries. When you're ready, I'll take you into their world. They're called the Bogomils, and their story is just beginning. We've left behind the roar of battle, the chants of warriors in red cloaks, and now the world grows quiet. Still, almost unbearably quiet. We're in the Balkans now, the land of rivers and forests. Bulgaria to be precise. It's the 10th century, and something unusual is beginning to stir in the lowlands. You won't see torches here, or swords. There are no fortresses, no red banners. What you'll find are soft footsteps on packed earth. Old men speaking in whispers, families gathering after dark in kitchens with shuttered windows. They aren't rebels in the usual sense, but they're dangerous. They believe that everything around you, the trees, the earth, your very body, was created not by God but by the devil. They're called the Bogomils. The name comes from their founder, a priest named Bogomil, which means dear to God. He appeared sometime around 950 AD, when Bulgaria was under the rule of Tsar Peter. The empire was powerful, the church was rich, the rituals were elaborate. But outside the cities, far from the gold and incense, people were hungry, disillusioned, forgotten. Bogomil gave them something the church no longer could: simplicity, no icons, no saints, no grand buildings, no complex ceremonies, just the word. He told them the truth, or what they believed to be the truth, that the physical world was a trap, created by Satan, a prison, and the only way out was through denial, through humility, through rejecting everything the world had to offer. Imagine hearing that, really hearing it, after years of being told that salvation costs money, that heaven is gated behind indulgences and obedience to bishops and kings. Now imagine someone looking you in the eye and saying none of that matters. God doesn't live in temples. He doesn't need gold. He doesn't want your rituals. He just wants you to wake up, and slowly they did. The Bogomils began organizing, not like armies, like families. They'd meet in secret, sometimes in caves, sometimes in homes, sometimes in forests. They didn't build churches. They didn't need to. They believed the true church was invisible, made up of those who had cast off the false world. They had no hierarchy, no pope, no bishop. Instead they had spiritual elders called elect. These were men and women who lived in complete poverty, ate no meat, drank no wine, refused marriage, and owned nothing. When the elect visited a village, the people would come in silence. They would sit on the floor. There was no sermon, just discussion. The elect would quote from the Gospels, speak softly about the battle between light and darkness, then leave as quietly as they came. The Bogomils refused to take oaths. They refused military service. They wouldn't pay tithes. They wouldn't touch the sacraments of the church. No baptism, no communion, no confession. They weren't trying to start a new religion. They believed they were restoring the old one before it had been corrupted by power. To most villagers, the message was intoxicating. To the church, it was poison. Word of the Bogomils reached Constantinople. The patriarch was alarmed. Tsar Peter tried to ignore them at first, but soon the pressure mounted. The empire could not tolerate this kind of spiritual independence. If people didn't need priests, didn't need churches, didn't pay tithes, what would be left? Persecution began. Bogomil teachers were hunted down, imprisoned or burned. Their writings were confiscated and destroyed. But like water, the movement flowed around the obstacles. Every time a village was purged, survivors would flee and carry the message further, into Macedonia, into Serbia, into northern Greece, even into the Byzantine heartland itself. The more the authorities crushed them, the quieter and more disciplined they became. The elect continued moving, preaching, guiding. Children were taught to memorize scripture by ear, so that if their books were taken, the teachings would still survive. They developed codes, marks carved on doorframes, ways of folding letters, symbols etched in dust. You wouldn't know a Bogomil by looking at them. That was the point. They had no uniforms, no signs. They blended in, until they didn't. In 1111, the movement reached its peak, and its darkest moment. A man named Basil, the spiritual leader of the Bogomils in Constantinople, was captured. The emperor at the time, Alexios Komnenos, personally oversaw the investigation, invited Basil to his palace under the pretense of peaceful dialogue. Instead he had him arrested and tortured. Still Basil refused to recant, even under pain. Even when offered a comfortable life in exchange for silence, he was burned alive. It was meant to be the end, but it wasn't. The flame spread westward. Bogomil refugees carried the teachings into France, where they mixed with other ideas and evolved into something even more feared. They became the seeds of a new cult, one we'll speak about soon, called the Cathars. But for now you remain here, in the Balkans, in the forests and valleys, listening to the wind outside a shuttered window. while a man with bare feet and tired eyes speaks quietly to a room full of people trying to believe in something again. You're not in danger, you're just an observer, watching as history unfolds one whisper at a time. And with that, we turn the page. The early medieval world is fading now. The flickering cults born in its shadows have either burned out or gone deeper underground. But the world is changing. A new age is dawning, an age of crusades, of papal power, of holy wars and heresies. You're about to enter the high Middle Ages, and the cults you'll meet next, they're bigger, bolder, and far more dangerous. The sun has risen a little higher on the medieval world. Let's keep walking. The year is somewhere around 1090. The world feels different now. The old empires we visited, the Sasanian kings, the Balkan rebels, the mountain revolutionaries, they've faded. In their place, new powers have risen. The Catholic Church has grown bolder. The Byzantine Empire clings to old strength. The Islamic world is fractured, and in the West, the First Crusade has already begun. People are no longer just trying to survive the chaos. They're now organizing within it, creating more structured, more dangerous movements. Movements that can't be easily dismissed as small heresies. These new cults begin to build kingdoms of their own, and one of them is about to become a name that survives even to this day. They are called the Assassins. But if you'd like, you can forget that word for now, the modern version of it, at least. Forget the video games, the hooded cloaks, the silent knives in the dark. We'll get to all that. But first I want you to experience what it was really like. You're in northern Persia now, the Alborz Mountains. The wind is colder here. The terrain is steep, almost unfriendly, but tucked away among the cliffs, high above the valley, there's a fortress that looks as if it was carved directly into the rock. It is called Alamet, and it will be your home for the next little while. This place is more than stone walls. It's a world within a world. You're not entering an army, you're entering a doctrine, a faith so total, so consuming, that men will gladly die for it, not just without fear, but with purpose, willingly, silently. This is the home of the Nizari Ismailis, a Shiite sect that broke away from the main Islamic branches. Their beliefs are complex, esoteric, and layered in symbolism. But what you need to know for now is this: they believe the world is full of hidden meanings, that truth is not found in the obvious, but in what lies beneath, that the Imam, the rightful descendant of the Prophet, is the living key to unlocking these truths. And at the center of it all is a man named Hassan al-Sabah. You picture him in a stone room lined with old books. His eyes are sharp, his beard white. He speaks slowly, deliberately. He doesn't shout. He doesn't need to. When Hassan speaks, people lean forward. He's a master of language, of persuasion, of belief. He didn't come to Alamet by force. He took it with a strategy, with ideas. Some say he converted the garrison with nothing but words. Others say there were bribes and secrets involved. But whatever the truth, once Hassan had the fortress, he never gave it up. And what he built there became the stuff of legend. Alamet wasn't just a fortress. It was a school, a sanctuary, a training ground. Here his followers were taught the deepest layers of Ismaili theology, ideas that most outsiders would never understand. They studied for years, not just in scripture, but in science, mathematics, astronomy, and tactics. But among the elite, there was another path. You've probably heard the term assassin, the Western distortion of the Arabic word hashashin. The origin of that name is still debated. Some say it came from their enemies, who believed they used hashish to hypnotize or brainwash new recruits. Others argue it was a smear, a misunderstanding, a mispronunciation. But whatever the origin, the fear was real, because the assassins had one tactic no other force in the medieval world dared to use: targeted killing. While kingdoms launched armies, and churches declared crusades, the assassins sent a single man, quiet, calm, trained, disguised if needed. He would blend in with a crowd, attend a sermon, wait for the moment, and then in full view, he would strike, a dagger, a throat, a swift death. Then he would make no attempt to flee. Often he would stand still, unafraid, and be killed immediately after. It wasn't suicide, it was sacrifice, a ritual, a duty. These men were known as fidari, those who sacrifice. They believed that dying for the cause wasn't tragic, it was noble, beautiful, even.
because what they were dying for was truth, divine truth, a better world, a righteous order, where the corrupt would no longer rule, and the Imam would lead the faithful in justice. Now think about what that means. To train for years, silently, patiently, knowing your final act would be to give up your life for a single precise strike. This wasn't chaos, this wasn't madness, it was discipline, devotion, a kind of terrifying purity, and it worked. For decades, the assassins kept kings, caliphs, and crusader lords awake at night. They couldn't be bribed, they couldn't be tracked, and they never missed their mark. One day, a Seljuk vizier would fall at the steps of a mosque. Another day, a crusader baron would collapse during a feast. No war, no ruse, just death, quick, intimate, and unforgettable. And always the same calling card, a knife left behind, a whisper that the order had sent its message. Rulers began checking under their beds, churches fortified their monasteries, walls were built higher, and still the Fidari found ways in. But as with all stories like this, the end came eventually. The Mongols swept through Persia, like a storm, and in 1256 they reached Alamat. The fortress fell, the libraries were burned, the towers were torn down stone by stone, the assassins were scattered, many were killed, others vanished into the fabric of history. But their legend, that survived, it was carried westward by frightened merchants, by breathless crusaders, by soldiers who barely escaped the blade. And in those stories, the assassins became something more than real. They became myth. And now, here you are, lying in the dark, hundreds of years later, hearing about them in a whisper. Funny how that works. The fortress is gone, the daggers are rusted, but the idea, the fear, remains. And we're not done. Because while Alamat burned, far to the west in Europe, another cult was growing. They didn't use knives. They used belief. They weren't killers. They were heretics. And their story ends in fire too. When you're ready, we'll walk into southern France and meet the Cathars, and meet the Cathars, and meet the Cathars.
This isn't the France you think of now. No Eiffel Tower, no Paris skyline, no cafes. This is 12th century Occitania, a land of troubadours, castles, farmers, and a quiet, growing cult that calls itself the true Church of God. They are known as the Cathars. To some, they were heretics. To others, saints. To the church, they were a sickness. Let me take you inside their world. It starts, not with a bang, but a whisper, a belief spreading slowly across hillsides and marketplaces, from lips of wandering preachers, from old scrolls written in the local tongue, from conversations too soft for a priest to hear. The Cathars believed in dualism, not unlike the Bogomils before them, who passed their ideas like a torch westward across Europe. But the Cathars took it further. They believed that the world, this world, the one you're lying in right now, was evil, not metaphorically, not in a human weakness kind of way. Evil. They believed in two gods. One was the good God, the God of spirit, of truth, of light, the creator of souls and the divine realm. The other was the God of matter, of flesh, of the physical world. This second God, they believed, was Satan, the one who created your body, your bones, your blood, who built this entire world as a kind of prison, a distraction, a cruel imitation of the real one. To escape, the Cathars believed you had to reject the world completely. That meant no meat, no wine, no sex, no marriage, no attachment, no wealth, no ownership, not even in the end your own name. They called their spiritual leaders the perfecti, the perfect ones, and these men and women lived exactly as they preached. You picture one now, dressed in plain robes, thin from fasting, eyes gentle but unwavering, walking from village to village in sandals, never asking for food, but always offered some, speaking to crowds, not in Latin, but in the local tongue, Occitan, so that everyone could understand. The perfecti carried no cross, no icon, no holy water, only the consolamentum, a spiritual rite that replaced all sacraments. It was a kind of blessing, a transmission of divine grace, one that could be received only once, and only when the recipient was truly ready to renounce the world forever. You didn't take it lightly. Some waited until their deathbed, because once you received it, you were no longer part of this world. To the peasants, the Cathars were comforting, peaceful. They healed the sick, gave freely, preached gently, They didn't ask for tithes or taxes. They offered a version of Christianity without corruption, without violence, without gold. To the church, this was a nightmare, because the Cathars didn't just criticize corruption. They denied the legitimacy of the church itself. They said the Pope was a fraud, that the priests were blind, that the entire system was built on lies. And more than anything, they refused to be silenced. By the early 13th century, Catharism had grown so strong in southern France that whole towns were said to be heretical. Local nobles protected them. Bishops ignored them. Some towns even refused to recognize papal authority. The Vatican had seen enough. In 1209, Pope Innocent III launched something the world had never seen before, a crusade, not against the Holy Land, not against Saracens, against Christians, against their own people. It would be called the Albigensian Crusade, named after the town of Albi, a Cathar stronghold. The Pope promised forgiveness of sins to any knight who took up arms, and tens of thousands did. The violence was shocking. Towns were sieged and burned to the ground, entire populations slaughtered. In one infamous incident, the town of Béziers was attacked. When asked how to distinguish Cathars from Catholics, the papal legate reportedly said, "Kill them all. God will know his own." Over 20,000 people were massacred. You can almost hear the screams now, drifting on the wind, rising from the flames, but you don't need to imagine it in detail. That's not what this moment is for. Just understand. The Cathars were hunted like animals, and yet they didn't fight back. Most refused to take up arms. Even as cities fell and friends were executed, many of the perfecti kept preaching, kept consoling, kept walking. They went underground, literally. They hid in caves, in cellars, in the mountains. They changed names, used signals, continued the faith in secret, but one by one their sanctuaries fell. The final stand came at Montségur, a fortress perched high on a rocky peak. There in 1244, after months of siege, the last major group of Cathars perfecti surrendered. They were offered a choice: renounce their faith or be burned. They chose the fire, 200 of them. They sang hymns as the flames rose. The Crusaders called it a victory. The church claimed the heresy had been stamped out. But the story doesn't end there, because even as the ashes cooled, the legend of the Cathars grew. Tales of their gentleness, their courage, their mysterious beliefs, they spread like seeds on the wind. Some said the Cathars had hidden a sacred treasure at Montségur. Others claimed they knew a secret truth the church had tried to destroy. In the centuries that followed, their name would be invoked in whispers, in books, in secret societies, in conspiracy theories. But right now all you need to know is this: they believed in a different world, and they were willing to die for it. And now we move again. You've heard from the rebels, the prophets, the purists, but in our next stop you'll meet a group that was different. Not rebels, not heretics, knights, sacred warriors, bound by vows. But some say those vows hid a darker truth. You've probably heard their name, the Templars. But what you've heard might not be the full story. We're still in Europe, still in the time of crusades. But now the setting shifts again, from the rural hills of southern France to the grand halls of stone fortresses, from secret cave gatherings to candlelit commanderies. We're stepping into the world of the Knights Templar. And while you've probably heard that name before, you might not know how strange, how mysterious and how terrifying their story eventually became. It begins in the year 1119. The First Crusade is over. Jerusalem, once held by Muslim armies, is now under Christian control, at least, for a little while. Pilgrims are coming in droves, eager to walk where they believe Christ once walked. But the roads to Jerusalem are dangerous. Bandits, desert raiders, lone riders hiding among the rocks. And so a small group of knights decides to take up a different kind of crusade. Not to conquer, but to protect. 9 men. That's all. Just 9. Led by a knight named Hugues de Payens, they swear sacred vows of poverty, of chastity, of obedience. They renounce personal wealth. They will own nothing. They will serve God by protecting pilgrims. They call themselves the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. But you know them by the shorter name, the Knights Templar. At first they're barely noticed, but slowly things begin to change. The King of Jerusalem gives them quarters on the Temple Mount, the same hill where the Jewish temple once stood, and later the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The symbolism is overwhelming. The Templars begin digging beneath their new home. We don't know what they were looking for, or what they found, but after that everything changes.
Within a few decades, the Templars are no longer just knights. They are bankers, landowners, castle keepers. They form the first international banking system, allowing nobles to deposit wealth in Europe and withdraw it safely in the Holy Land. They wear distinctive white mantles with red crosses. They never cut their beards. They train relentlessly. They fight ferociously. They never ransom themselves. They never retreat. To join them, you must renounce the world completely. You take no wife. You inherit no land. You are buried with nothing. And within 100 years, the Templars become something no medieval institution had ever seen. They are warrior monks with power. They own estates in France, England, Spain, Portugal. They answer only to the Pope. They become wealthy, efficient, respected, and feared because no one really knows how they operate. Their rituals are secret. Their rules rigid. They meet behind closed doors. They answer only to their Grand Master and to God. And when the Crusades begin to crumble, when Jerusalem falls, when the knights are pushed back to the coasts, the Templars remain, holding fortresses, guarding relics, whispered to be protecting something greater than just territory. Some believe they found something beneath the Temple Mount, a treasure, a scroll, a secret. No one agrees what it was, but the rumors begin, and the church starts to worry. By the early 1300s, the Templars are no longer on the front lines of war. They're in Europe, managing estates, issuing loans, influencing politics. And then they make a mistake. They cross a king. Philip IV of France is heavily in debt to the Templars. He's impatient, paranoid, broke. He needs a way out. And so on Friday the 13th, in the year 1307, he orders the mass arrest of every Templar in France. They are accused of unthinkable things: spitting on crosses, denying Christ, kissing each other in secret rituals, worshipping a mysterious idol named Baphomet, engaging in indecent rites. The accusations are shocking. The public is stunned, and the church, under pressure from Philip, begins to investigate. Templars are tortured, burned, forced to confess. Some deny everything, even under pain. Others break. We don't know what's true and what's not. The line between reality and fear becomes impossible to see. But what we do know is this: Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Templars, is taken to a scaffold in 1340. Before the flames are lit, he calls out to the Pope and the King. He says they will both die within the year, and they do. The Templars are officially dissolved. Their property is seized. Their name is cursed. But the myth only grows. Some say survivors fled to Scotland, to Portugal, that they became secret orders, guarding hidden relics. Others say the Freemasons descended from them. Some even say they found the Holy Grail. You don't need to believe any of it. You just need to know that a group of men once vowed to live without comfort, to die without fear, and to serve a higher power, no matter the cost. And whether they were saints or something darker, they left their mark. You're still lying there quietly, and that's all you need to do. Let me carry the story forward, because after the knights fall, the mystics rise. Our next story isn't about blood, it's about visionaries. Men who looked beyond the sky and believed the world was about to end. They didn't wear armor. They wore robes. They wandered through cities in long winding processions, and with every step they struck fear into the hearts of those who watched. They were called the Flagellants, and their pain was their prayer.
It's the 14th century, and something is happening. The Black Death is sweeping across the continent. Imagine the world around you falling apart in slow motion. Village after village silenced. Bells tolling for the dead every hour. Markets abandoned. Entire families disappearing within days. Some towns have no one left to bury the corpses. People are terrified. And in that terror, a new kind of cult begins to form. You don't see them at first. You hear them. A low chant. A line of men walking barefoot down the muddy road, backs already bleeding, their hands gripping whips, ropes with knotted ends, sometimes tipped in iron or bone. They are flagellants. They walk in silence except for the rhythm of their movement and the soft groans of pain. Their robes are plain, often white or beige, stained with blood. Their heads are covered. Some wear crowns of thorns. They carry wooden crosses and crucifixes, but they're not priests. They're ordinary people. Merchants, tailors, farmers. Some are former soldiers, but they believe they're on a mission. They believe the plague is God's punishment, not just for kings or popes, but for everyone. And the only way to save the world is through suffering. They gather in groups of 30, 40, even 100. walking barefoot across the countryside from one city to the next. In each town they stop in the main square. A space is cleared, and then without speaking, they form a circle. One by one they kneel, remove their robes, and whip themselves across the back, hard, again and again. Each blow is a prayer. Some of them chant hymns as they bleed, others fall into trances. The sound of the whips echoes off the stone walls. The crowd watches in silence. Some cry, some faint, and sometimes, others join in. They travel from Germany to France, from Poland to the Low Countries, their numbers growing. They sleep outdoors. They eat whatever is given. They don't stay long. They say their message, perform their penance, and move on. They are not part of the church. In fact, the church begins to fear them because their message is simple and dangerous. They say you don't need priests, you don't need sacraments, you don't need Rome, you only need pain, purity through suffering. It spreads fast, faster than the church can respond. By 1349, in the heart of the plague years, there are thousands of flagellants across Europe. Some groups take it further. They begin blaming others for the plague. Jews, heretics, foreigners. Violence follows. Mobs form. Towns burn. The church steps in. Bishops denounce them. Pope Clement V issues a decree condemning the movement. Troops are sent to break up the processions. Leaders are arrested. Some are executed. And slowly, the movement dies out. Not all at once, but it fades. The roads grow quiet again. The whips are laid down, and the flagellants, those bleeding pilgrims, disappear. But their memory lingers. In art, in stories, in warnings, because theirs was a kind of devotion that made people uneasy. It wasn't performed in cathedrals, it wasn't blessed by priests. It was raw, bleeding, terrifying, and for a time it felt holy. You're still with me, that's good. Let that image drift away, the circle of kneeling pilgrims under a pale European sky, and know that you're safe now, wrapped in your own quiet world. But we're not done yet, because in another part of Europe, far from the cities of wealth and plague, another group was forming. They weren't warriors, they weren't mystics, they were children, and they believed with all their hearts that they had been chosen to reclaim the Holy Land. No swords, no shields, just faith and innocence, and the long road ahead. We've seen warriors, mystics, monks, and martyrs, but this next story, this one is different, because it doesn't begin with soldiers, it begins with children. This is the story of the Children's Crusade, one of the strangest, saddest and most haunting movements of the medieval world. And though parts of it have slipped into legend, what remains is enough to stay with you, long after the last voice falls silent. Let's go back to the year 1212. Europe is still reeling from the earlier Crusades. Jerusalem has changed hands again and again. Pilgrims are growing anxious. The clergy preaches that God's favor has been lost, that something pure is needed to reclaim the Holy Land. And then, something begins to happen. In a small village in France, a boy, maybe 12 years old, maybe 14, begins to speak. His name is Stephen of Cloyes. He says he's seen a vision, a light brighter than the sun, a message from Jesus himself. According to him, Christ has told him that only the innocent, children, can take back Jerusalem. Not knights, not kings, just children. No blood, no weapons, only faith. At first people laugh, but Stephen is persistent. He preaches in marketplaces, outside churches, at crossroads, and slowly, others begin to listen, to believe. He says the sea will part for them, like it did for Moses, that angels will guide them, that Muslims will convert peacefully when they see the purity of the children's hearts. And then, they start to follow him, first dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. Not just children. Some are teenagers, some are wandering beggars, some are adults with the minds of children, some are just poor, hungry, and desperate for purpose. But they begin to walk, from village to village, singing hymns, carrying crosses, chanting as they go. People line the roads to watch, and the movement grows. At the same time, in Germany, a similar story is unfolding. A boy named Nicholas of Cologne gathers a second wave of young crusaders. His message is the same, only the pure of heart can succeed where armies have failed. And so two great movements of children begin to march across Europe. No formal leaders, no supplies, no protection, only belief. They sleep in barns, in fields, under trees. They beg for food. They keep moving. Some towns welcome them with awe, others turn them away. Many children die on the road, from exhaustion, hunger, illness, but the groups push forward, convinced that a miracle awaits. Eventually Stephen's group reaches Marseille, on the southern coast of France. They expect the sea to part for them. It doesn't. They wait for days. Some begin to cry, others pray harder, but no dry path appears. Then, two local merchants offer them ships. Free passage, they say, a gift, a miracle in itself. 7 ships, the children board. They sing as they leave the harbor, but they never arrive in the Holy Land. Some are shipwrecked off the coast of Sardinia. Hundreds drown. The rest are sold into slavery in North Africa. The merchants were slave traders. The voyage was a trap. Those children, whose names are mostly forgotten, never return. In Germany, Nicholas's group fares no better. They try to cross the Alps. Many freeze. Others are attacked. When they finally reach Italy, the Pope tells them to go home. Some do. Many never make it. In the end, the children's crusade leaves behind no victories, no relics, no holy conquest, only questions. Historians still debate what really happened. Some say it was never thousands, only hundreds. Others argue it was exaggerated over time. But the bones of the story, the heart of it, remains. That in a world ruled by blood and sword, there were once those who believed that purity alone could change it. They were wrong, but they believed. And that belief, that haunting tragic hope, still echoes quietly, like the sound of small footsteps on an ancient road. You're still safe, still here. Let that story fade now, like the sea closing over a ship that never made it home. Because next, we'll leave Europe behind. We'll travel east, to China, where a secret sect is beginning to form, one that believes in the eternal mother, in a coming Messiah, and in the power of the lotus, the flower that blooms in mud. They are quiet, patient, waiting for the world to end. They are the White Lotus Society. You've arrived in medieval China. It's the time of the Song dynasty, sometime between the 12th and 13th centuries. The empire is vast. Cities rise along the rivers like pearls on a silk thread. There are scholars, libraries, poets, marketplaces, with lacquered wares and jasmine tea. There are Confucian courts, Taoist mystics, Buddhist monasteries, and hidden among them all, a secret sect. They don't have uniforms, no temples you can visit, no loud declarations. They gather in quiet rooms, lit by paper lanterns, in homes, in caves, in valleys where the wind carries the scent of rice and rain. They call themselves the White Lotus Society, and their belief that the world is broken, that the end is coming, and that a great enlightened being, the Maitreya Buddha, is about to return. They do not fear the end, they await it, but not passively, because the White Lotus is more than a prophecy. It's a network, a movement, a kind of underground engine humming quietly through villages, towns and provinces. The teachings are gentle on the surface. They believe in reincarnation, in karma, in the importance of meditation and good deeds. But they also believe something far more dangerous, that the current order, the emperors, the officials, the state-sponsored religions, is corrupt, not just flawed but unworthy of survival. To outsiders, the White Lotus looks like a peaceful Buddhist sect, but that's only half the truth. Inside their meetings, they speak of the Eternal Mother, a divine feminine force that created all beings, and will call her children back to her when the end comes. They teach that the world has gone through multiple cosmic cycles, and that we are living in the last one. The Pure Land, the heavenly realm, is waiting, but it can only be reached when this world collapses. And so slowly, their doctrine evolves. From meditation to militancy, they begin recruiting, especially among peasants, the poor, the landless. They promise salvation, not through temple rituals, but through devotion, secrecy, and resistance. Initiates are sometimes given charms, passwords, or coded books. Meetings are held in darkness. Members recite chants in unison, bow to invisible icons, and prepare, not for an open war, but for a time when the old world will fall, and the new one will rise. You can picture it now, a dark room lit only by a single oil lamp, shadows flickering across the wall. A man reads softly from a scroll written in red ink. Women and men kneel quietly, heads bowed. No one speaks unless spoken to.
Their belief is total, and when the Mongol invasions weaken the ruling dynasties, the White Lotus stirs. They see the chaos, not as a crisis, but as a sign. A few cells rise in rebellion, small at first, scattered, but the idea spreads. Local warlords begin to ally with them. Farmers with nothing to lose take up arms, believing they are soldiers of the Eternal Mother. It doesn't become a full-scale uprising just yet, not in the Song era, but the movement survives and grows. It goes underground again, waiting, for decades, for centuries, and then long after the Song dynasty has fallen, and the Mongol-led Yuan dynasty rules China, the White Lotus returns with full force. They spark a rebellion that eventually weakens the Yuan and helps give rise to the Ming dynasty. But that's a story for another time. For now you just need to know this. The White Lotus society wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy. It was a flower blooming quietly in the mud, rooted in sorrow, rising towards something better. And sometimes, the most terrifying cults aren't the ones that scream, they're the ones that whisper, "You're still doing well, stay with me a little longer." Because now we leave Asia behind, and return to the cold, damp air of medieval England. There's a new group waiting for us there. They speak softly, they carry hidden books, they believe the Pope is not holy, but the Antichrist. They are the Lollards, and they're ready to show us how heresy can hide in plain sight, and hide in plain sight, and hide.
We're back in Europe now. The air feels heavier here, damp with fog, thick with coal smoke, and buzzing quietly with superstition and control. The church is at its peak. The cathedrals rise like mountains of stone, and the Latin tongue flows from every altar. But not everyone is convinced. Some people have started to question, quietly, carefully, and some, they've decided to answer back. It's the late 14th century in England, and a movement is beginning to stir. A movement of preachers, peasants, and hidden books. They will be called Lollards, though it won't be a name they give themselves. It's a name the church will use. One that starts as an insult, but like many things in history, the truth is deeper than the label. Let me show you. We begin with a man named John Wycliffe. He's not a soldier, he's not a rebel, he's a scholar, from Oxford, no less. He wears the robes of a priest, reads Latin fluently, understands the structure of church law better than most bishops. But deep inside him, there's something burning. A question: why? If God's message is for everyone, is his book locked behind Latin? Why are the scriptures controlled by the clergy, guarded like gold, and never placed in the hands of the common people? Wycliffe starts preaching, softly, at first, then louder. He says that the Pope has no divine authority, that priests are not necessary for salvation, that the true church is not a building, not a bureaucracy, but the gathering of believers, wherever they are. And then, he does something unthinkable. He begins translating the Bible into English. The church is horrified. This isn't just a breach of etiquette. It's heresy, a direct threat to the very structure of religious control. But Wycliffe is protected, at least for a while, by powerful allies. Nobles who admire his ideas, students who carry his words into the streets. And after his death, his followers continue the work. These followers are the Lollards. No one knows for sure where the word comes from. Some say it means mumblers, a mockery of their quiet preaching. Others think it comes from a Dutch term for heretics. Either way, the name sticks. But their mission, it's anything but small. They begin copying Wycliffe's English Bible by hand, one verse, one chapter at a time, smuggling them from house to house, reading by candlelight, whispering the words of Scripture into the ears of the poor. They start forming study groups, not in monasteries but in barns, back rooms, forest clearings, and slowly an underground network grows. They don't dress differently, they don't march in protest, they blend in, but their minds, their hearts, they're set on fire. They reject the doctrine of transubstantiation, the idea that bread becomes flesh during communion. They deny the use of indulgences. They criticize the wealth of the church. They believe that any man, any woman, can be a priest, that confession, prayer, and salvation don't need permission. To many in power, this is terrifying, because it means the hierarchy isn't sacred, the system isn't divinely protected, and the people might start thinking for themselves. In 1401, the English Parliament passes the first statute for burning heretics. The Lollards are now hunted. Some are arrested. Others are tortured. A few are publicly executed. One of them is William Sawtry, burned alive for refusing to renounce the English Bible. Another is John Oldcastle, a nobleman who sides with the Lollards and is eventually hanged and burned for treason and heresy. The crackdown is severe, but the Lollards never fully vanish. They adapt, they hide their texts behind false walls. They disguise themselves as pilgrims. They bury their scrolls beneath fields. In some towns, you can still find records of Lollard trials, lists of names, accusations whispered by neighbors, and confessions made under duress. But through it all, the words survive. Wycliffe's Bible continues to circulate, and the seeds of the Lollard movement, scattered, suppressed, buried, begin to take root in other hearts. Hearts that one day will beat loudly during the Protestant Reformation. But for now, they beat quietly, like a drum beneath the floorboards. You've just walked through another secret hallway in medieval history, one lined with books, not blades. But we're not finished, because just beyond these quiet English fields, another fire is building, one with banners, and songs, and battle cries. A new movement is rising in Bohemia, led by a man who believes in truth above obedience, and who will pay for that belief with his life. His followers will become warriors of faith, fighting crusades of their own. Their name, the Hussites, and they're waiting for us next. Now we cross over to Bohemia, modern-day Czechia. The cities here are quiet and old. Red rooftops, bell towers, stone streets that glisten when it rains. And underneath all that beauty is a growing unrest. It's the early 1400s. Europe is tense. The church is divided. Corruption is rampant. And in the city of Prague, a preacher has begun to speak. His name is Jan Hus, and though he may look like a simple priest, with a long robe, soft hands and a scholar's patience, what he's about to do will shake the foundations of the church. He believes what many before him have whispered, that the church has lost its way, that priests are too rich, that popes have forgotten humility, that the word of God should be accessible to all. He reads Wycliffe, he studies scripture, and then he begins to preach. But he doesn't hide. He doesn't meet in barns or secret caves. He preaches in Bethlehem Chapel, right in the heart of Prague, in Czech, not Latin, so everyone can understand. He says that communion should be shared equally, with bread and wine, not just bread for the common people and wine reserved for clergy. This idea becomes a symbol, a message, and soon an emblem, the chalice. The chalice becomes a banner for those who follow him, those who want truth, reform, and equality in the church. At first, the church tries to silence him gently. Warnings, letters, meetings, but Huss will not stop, so they invite him to the Council of Constance in 1415. They promise him safe passage, but the moment he arrives, they arrest him. They put him on trial for heresy. He defends himself calmly, eloquently, but his fate is already sealed. And so one cold day, they lead him to a pyre. They tie him to the stake. He refuses to recant, and they burn him alive. The flames rise. His ashes are scattered in the Rhine. But Huss's voice doesn't die. It multiplies. Bohemia explodes. His followers, now called Hussites, rise up, not just in grief but in open rebellion. They are not quiet heretics. They are an army. At their peak they control vast territories. They build Tabor, their own fortified city, a kind of holy commune, where property is shared, and scripture is taught freely. Their fighters, often peasants, carpenters, farmers, become legendary for their tactics. They turn wagons into armored fortresses. They circle them in rings on the battlefield. Inside are slings, crossbows, cannons. They're led by a man named Jan Žižka, a veteran, blind in one eye, then blind in both, and still he leads, strategizes, wins. Under his command, the Hussites defeat crusades, not once, but 4 times. The church sends wave after wave of soldiers against them, and the Hussites break them, because they aren't just fighting for land, they're fighting for something deeper, for a belief that the church should serve the people, not rule them, that faith belongs to every soul, not just those in robes and crowns. Eventually, the Hussites splinter. Some are more radical, others more willing to compromise. After Žižka's death, internal disagreements begin to fracture the movement. By 1434, the Battle of Lipany marks the end of the militant phase. The radicals are defeated, some Hussites reintegrate into society, some ideas are absorbed quietly into Czech culture, but the damage is done. The church knows now that belief, real belief, can't be silenced by force, and the memory of Huss doesn't fade. A century later, Martin Luther will name him a hero. The Reformation is coming, but before that, there's one more place I want to take you. Not a battlefield, not a chapel, a street, a quiet street, lined with torches, filled with masked faces, and at the center, not an army, not a preacher, but a child, alone, accused of witchcraft. You're standing now in a village that could be anywhere in Europe, England, Germany, Poland, France. It doesn't matter. The buildings are wooden, the roofs are thatched, smoke curls from chimneys into a grey sky. But something is wrong here. People are afraid, not of invaders, or plague, or famine, but of each other. It's the 15th century, and a new kind of cult is forming, one that doesn't gather in secret, or worship in caves. This one is born of accusation, whispers, fingers pointed in the dark. You hear it first in the marketplace. Someone says a woman's cow went dry because her neighbor gave her a strange look. Someone else says their baby fell ill after eating bread that had been touched by a certain hand. Soon someone remembers seeing that same woman talking to herself by the stream, or picking herbs at dusk, or walking barefoot through the churchyard. The word begins to spread. Witch. There's no leader of this cult, no sacred text, no meetings, and yet, it grows. Because all it takes is fear, and a system ready to believe it. You see her now, the woman in question. Maybe she's older, or younger than you expected. Maybe she's kind, maybe she's not. But it doesn't matter. Someone says she made a pact with the devil, that she flies at night, that she keeps a familiar, a toad, a cat, a shadowy shape that follows her home, that she spoils crops with a glance, that she boils children's fat into salve, that she dances naked with others in the forest. None of it needs to be proven, because the panic itself is the proof. In a strange, horrible way, the community now believes they are under attack, by the invisible, the cursed, the impure, and so they must purge. Witch hunting becomes a kind of religion, a warped cult of its own. Torture is used, testimonies are extracted, through pain or terror, or sheer confusion. Some confess just to end the ordeal, some name others to escape the flames. Children accuse their mothers, neighbors betray old friends. A kind of fever grips the land, and it spreads, from town to town, village to village. Inquisitors begin traveling with manuals, books that describe how to detect a witch, how to question her, how to tell if her tears are real. The Malleus Maleficarum, or the Hammer of Witches, becomes one of the most widely read books in Europe. It explains how witches seduce, how they conjure storms, how they attend sabbats in the woods to kiss the devil, and feast on desecrated bread. And people believe it, because when fear becomes doctrine, reality doesn't stand a chance. You watch the trial now. The woman is brought forward, bound, head bowed. The crowd stares but no one speaks. She's asked questions that have no right answers. If she denies them, it's proof she's lying. If she confesses, it's proof she's damned. They search her body for witches' marks, moles, scars, anything unusual. They prick her skin with needles. They say if she bleeds, she's human. If she doesn't, she's not. She doesn't bleed, or perhaps the person doing the pricking just says she doesn't. It doesn't matter. The sentence is passed. She is led to a pyre, or a river, or a platform. Sometimes she's hanged, sometimes she's burned, sometimes she's drowned, and sometimes she's drowned, and sometimes she walks away. But the cult of fear survives, because once you believe that the devil is walking among you, anyone can be the next target, even the ones doing the accusing, even the children. The idea of witchcraft, as a cult, a conspiracy, a demonic network that threatens society, it becomes one of the most powerful and destructive myths of the Middle Ages and beyond. It's not a real cult, not in the sense we've seen before, but the hysteria that forms around it, that is real, that is organized, that is terrifying, and it endures for centuries. You're still here, still safe. Let that image drift away now. The bonfire dimming, the crowd dispersing, the echo of false testimony fading into silence, because we've nearly reached the end of this long, quiet road. Just a few more voices to meet. In the next stretch we'll return to Italy,
to a group that believed the world was about to be purified by fire. A group of flag-burning fanatics who filled the streets with songs and sermons and fear. They were led by a monk with eyes like coals and a voice like thunder. They were not just a cult, they were a movement, and they nearly consumed a city. They are the followers of Girolamo Savonarola.
We're in Italy now, the late 15th century. Specifically, we're standing in Florence. But not the Florence of golden light and calm evenings. Not the Florence of artists sketching along riverbanks or merchants smiling beneath the arches of ancient bridges. This is a Florence in turmoil, and at the center of the storm is a monk. He walks barefoot. He wears a simple black robe, frayed at the edges. His voice, it's not calm like mine. It's booming, righteous, unforgiving. His name is Girolamo Savonarola, and you're about to see what happens when a cult doesn't form in the shadows, but rises right into the heart of a republic, under torchlight and bells. Savonarola isn't from Florence originally. He's from Ferrara, born into a world of plague and corruption, much like many others we've visited tonight. He studies medicine first, then theology. He becomes a Dominican friar, quiet at first, scholarly, but something inside him is different. He begins to have visions, dreams, prophecies. He sees Italy drowning in sin, sees Florence choked by vanity, sees the church, the very church he has devoted his life to, twisted by greed, and so he begins to preach. At first, people are unsure what to make of him. His sermons are like no others. They don't soothe, they strike. He speaks of fire, of judgment, of cities falling under God's wrath. But the timing is perfect. Florence is restless. The Medici family, once the rulers of the city, have been pushed out. The French have invaded. Power is fractured. Into that vacuum steps Savonarola. And people listen. Not just the poor, not just the devout. Everyone. His message is intoxicating. The world is ending soon. God will punish the wicked. Florence must become a new Jerusalem. Pure, humble, cleansed of all vanity. And how do you cleanse a city? You burn it. His followers, many of them young men and boys, begin patrolling the streets. They call themselves the Pieghinoni, or weepers. They go door to door collecting objects of sin, jewelry, paintings, books, mirrors, makeup, fine clothes, instruments. They pile them in the city squares, and then they light the fires. These are the bonfires of the vanities, great pyres where priceless art and literature are reduced to ash, not stolen, not sold, just destroyed. Because to Savonarola, the beauty of the world is a trap, a distraction from God. He declares Florence a theocracy, a holy republic. His sermons are broadcast by word of mouth, by chant, by raw fervor. People confess in the streets. Merchants abandon their profits. Wives burn their dowries. Even some artists stop painting. For a moment, a strange flickering moment, it seems as though the entire city has surrendered to him. But nothing that burns this hot can last forever. His enemies begin to circle. The Pope, Alexander VI, the Borgia Pope, is enraged. He demands Savonarola stop preaching. When he refuses, he is excommunicated. Still Savonarola preaches, but his grip is slipping. Florence is tired. The miracles he promised haven't come. The purity he demanded has grown into suspicion, fear, exhaustion. Then comes the final blow. Savonarola agrees to a trial by fire, a literal one. 2 sides, 2 fires, a challenge to prove whose truth is real, his or his enemies. He promises God will protect him, but a storm arrives. Rain floods the streets. The fire is cancelled, and the people take it as a sign. He is arrested, tortured, forced to confess. And in 1498, Girolamo Savonarola, the monk who turned Florence into a cult, is hanged in the Piazza della Signoria. His body is burned, his ashes scattered, and the city exhales. But the strange silence he left behind never fully disappears. Some of the children who danced around those bonfires would one day walk past statues of angels and remember the flames. You can imagine them now, older, quieter, still hearing the echoes of that voice that once promised fire could purify the soul, that beauty was sin, that the world could be reborn through ash. But the world kept spinning, and so do we. You've come far. But before we rest completely, there's one final place I want to take you. Not east, not west, but inward, to a cult without name or leader, one made of whispers and dread, lingering beneath everything we've seen. A final descent into the strange shadows of the medieval world. This final cult, if you can call it that, doesn't have a name, no robes, no banners, no songs. It doesn't gather in temples or leave records in ink, because it lives in fear itself, the kind of fear that filled the gaps between reason and belief during the entire medieval era, a fear that whispered in ears during thunderstorms, that sat heavy in the chest when crops failed, that stared from the edge of the forest at dusk. You can think of this final chapter as a kind of curtain, drawn behind the stage of everything we've seen, a hidden cult of nightmares and legends, sewn tightly into the fabric of medieval life. It begins with whispers, about the man down the road who never speaks, about the midwife who lives alone, about the monk who reads in languages no one else understands. In a world where disease strikes without warning, lightning splits churches, and rulers die in their sleep, there is a need to explain, to name a reason, and so people begin to speak of secret gatherings, of rituals held at night, and of words never meant to be said aloud. Some say there are those who meet at crossroads at midnight, who dance backwards in circles, who boil herbs in silence, and speak to spirits, who wear animal skins, who carry bones, who anoint themselves in wax and ash. They say these groups call upon things not of this world, things with names older than scripture. Others claim there are monks who've strayed too far into old texts, forbidden pages hidden in catacombs, that they chant in forgotten tongues, not to God, but to something older, something that waits in shadow. They say some hermits do not seek solitude, but audience, with what no one can say. And then there are the dreams. People report the same visions, of forests that breathe, of mirrors that whisper, of faces that look like their own but move just slightly wrong. It's easy to dismiss, until someone vanishes, or is found changed, and the stories return. In some parts of Europe, villagers mark their doors with symbols, not crosses, but sigils passed down without names, meant to protect, or warn, or distract something that might be watching. Even priests begin to wear charms, hidden under their robes. They don't preach about it, they don't name it, but they believe something is out there just beyond reason. A presence, a hunger, not a god, not a devil, just a force, waiting. It may have started as superstition, folklore, the leftover bones of pagan belief, but in time it becomes more than that. It becomes a mood, a presence behind every candle flame that flickers without wind, behind every knock that comes at the wrong hour, behind every child born with a mark no one can explain. This unnamed cult of fear stretches across the entire medieval world. Different names, different faces, but always the same weight in the air. It is not organized, but it spreads, because in an age where books are rare and death is common, and the sky changes without warning, belief is often the only thing people have, and sometimes belief grows teeth. But not everything feared in the dark is real, and not everything real is feared. Some of these cults, the ones we've traveled through tonight, were seeking light, justice, freedom. They just lost their way. Others were born of power, control, desperation. But in the end, they were all human. Which brings us back to you, lying here, listening, breathing quietly in your own time. The world around you may still carry shadows, but now, you've seen where they come from, and maybe that makes them a little less frightening. Or maybe it reminds you just how strange, and deep and fascinating history really is. So rest now, let it all fade. Let the names and voices fall into quiet again. Barsdak, the Paulicians, the Assassins, the Cathars, the Templars, the Flagellants, the Children, the Witches, the Flames. It's all behind you now. History will keep whispering, but for tonight, you've heard enough. Sleep well, and thank you for staying.